Hey, friends. Well, welcome to Q on Q. We're glad you're with us this week. If you're listening when this is first posting, it's early February, and we're a little over a month into 2025. I think we're starting to finally thaw out. At least I say that a little bit. We've had this pretty steady pattern of snow and cold lately. I mean, I know it's winter, but it seems like it's been unusual, at least for the past few years we've had. Kind of a steady mix of snow and then some cold, and then it warms up, then it rains, and we have ice. We've had this kind of calm pattern right now, but I guess it's supposed to snow later this week, so winter is not over yet. Well, anyways, it's winter, I guess, seeing as we're just a little over a month into the year. Have you made resolutions or you've been striving to keep something into the new year? How is it going for you? I read a recent report by one of the major news organizations that said just 8% of respondents kept their resolutions for the first month of last year. And I hope you've had better luck this year. In that same study, less than 1% said they kept it for the whole year. Well, as I've mentioned before, I think we can all admit sticking with something isn't always easy, especially when we have obstacles to overcome. If you've been listening to our episodes this year, you've heard me talk a lot about focus in 2025. That is my one word for this year. I'm spending time putting certain parts of life back into focus as I start this new year. Different from a resolution, it isn't necessarily just one thing I'm committing to do or not do, but rather a change in lifestyle. Well, I promised you all an update, so here's how it's going. I'm certainly not batting 100%, and I won't sit here and tell you all the areas I vowed to focus on have changed, but there have been improvements in a lot of areas. I've definitely seen a better balance in work-family time. Hopefully, my family would say the same thing. I've been using tools and resources at my disposal to help streamline work, get down ideas for new compositions, and make a game plan for our financial future. Those things are going good, though there's still a lot to do. We're still working on the reading part. I vowed to read more in 2025, and I'm almost done with a book I started 2 years ago, but I'm reading more devotionals every day, and we're making progress in that area. We're still working on the food part too. The Super Bowl was yesterday, and it's kind of hard when you've got pounds and pounds of chicken wings sitting in front of you, but trying to swap out unhealthy snack choices with better ones is something we're working on, and still portion control and things like that is definitely room for improvement, but it's slow. But I promise I'll update you as the year goes on, and I pray you've been able to keep your focus on the things you want to strive for in 2025. Well, we start a new series this week, and it's inspired by something related to this podcast, but something that kind of came out of the blue for me. If you've been a longtime listener, you know that you can get this podcast on most major providers and on YouTube. Well, I was checking out our stats on YouTube a few weeks back, and I came across something kind of interesting. A stat that I really never thought of. And to be honest, it kind of shocked me at first. When you look at YouTube statistics about your channel, you can really get down to some very finite details. And I pulled out all the details of just the Q on Q podcast. There's views and subscribers and watch time and something called impressions. Our Q on Q videos on YouTube have surpassed 50,000 impressions. And that means they've shown up in people's searches over 50,000 times. The thumbnails and the info for our episodes have been seen 50,000 times in the last 3 years. Now, at first, that number overwhelmed me a little bit. Then I kind of stepped back a minute and thought, well, it's probably small in the grand scheme of things. It got me thinking, though, what do those impressions mean? People aren't all clicking through. They're searching for a term and getting a super quick first impression about this podcast through a title and a thumbnail. So I first thought about those impressions, and then I looked up the definition of impression. And it said this: an idea, feeling, or opinion about something or someone, especially one formed without conscious thought or on the basis of little evidence. People that see our thumbnails on YouTube have a title and a picture to go off of. This gave me an idea. Impressions are a part of almost everything we do. We see someone, we meet someone, we have an interaction with someone. we form an impression. In reality, impressions are where faith and perception come together to shape how we view others and how we believe they see us. So, in this series, we're going to reflect on the marks we leave on others through words, actions, and even subtle glances, like that side eye, and how those impressions align with God's call to love and understand one another. We all know that first impressions can be powerful, but they aren't always accurate. What happens when we extend grace, offer second chances, and see others as God sees them? The Bible reminds us that while humans look at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. In this series, I'm hoping we'll explore how we can cultivate a divine perspective towards the people around us. But impressions aren't just about what we think of others, they're also about what others think of us. How much of our identity is shaped by the opinions of others? And how much should we rest in the truth of who God says we are? In the first part of this new series that I'm calling Impressions, we're going to take a look at first impressions and second chances. First impressions are the take we get about a person or event or circumstance or opportunity based on our very quick first interaction. And second chances are the opportunities we get when our first impressions aren't always on point. First impressions can be powerful, can't they? They literally shape how we respond to people, often before we really know them. Whether it's meeting somebody at work, a new neighbor, or even a stranger in line at the grocery store, we often form opinions in a matter of seconds. Research tells us that these judgments are often based on outward cues. It could be appearance, or body language, or even a tone of voice. But here's the thing: while first impressions can be helpful, they can also be misleading. Those first impressions are often incomplete or even wrong. And thankfully, our story doesn't have to end with a first impression. Have you ever made a snap judgment about somebody only to be proven completely wrong? Or have you been on the receiving end of a mistaken first impression? Maybe somebody assumed something about you that wasn't true at all. I know, I've been there. Today, we're going to explore how faith teaches us to give second chances to others and ourselves when those initial judgments miss the mark. Let's start with a story from Scripture. Luke chapter 19, one of the most powerful examples of a wrong first impression followed by a second chance. It's the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. You might know him from a children's song, Wee Little Man he was. But back then, tax collectors were despised. They were seen as corrupt and greedy, working for the Roman government and often taking more money than they were supposed to. So when Jesus entered Jericho and Zacchaeus climbed a tree to catch a glimpse of him, the crowd must have been beside themselves. To them, Zacchaeus was the last person that Jesus would care about. But what did he do? Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus and said, "Come down here immediately. I must stay at your house today." The crowd grumbled, but Zacchaeus, moved by Jesus' acceptance, repented and promised to repay anyone he had cheated 4 times over. Man, talk about a second chance. This story reminds us that Jesus doesn't judge us by our labels that are given by society, or even the mistakes we've made. He sees our hearts and offers us grace. But what about us? How often do we hold on to those negative first impressions of people? It's easy to do, we're human. But we're called to something greater. What if we tried to see people as God sees them? Not for their outward appearances or their past mistakes, but for their potential and their humanity. Think about this. Have you ever met somebody and immediately thought, they seem trustworthy, or man, they're not very friendly? Maybe it was the way they smiled, or didn't. Maybe it was their body language, or how confidently they spoke. Whatever the reason, that initial judgment likely shaped how you interacted with them going forward. The thing about first impressions is that they tend to stick. If you meet someone when they're having a bad day, you might carry that negative perception of them even after you learn they're actually a pretty nice person. This can happen in all areas of life: meeting somebody new at work, sitting next to somebody new at church, or even interacting with a stranger in line at the store. Sometimes first impressions help us navigate social situations, but they can also be unfair or inaccurate. After all, we rarely know what's really going on in someone's life when we meet them. Maybe the person who seemed rude was just overwhelmed. Maybe the person who came across as shy was just nervous. Giving people the benefit of the doubt creates space for more meaningful connections. Think about a time when your first impression of someone turned out to be wrong. How did getting to know that person better change your perception? And what might have been missed if you'd held on to that initial judgment? How often do we judge others too quickly, missing their true character? I want you to take a minute right now. Just think about somebody who surprised you. Maybe you met them and you assumed one thing about them initially, but later you realized that they had qualities or a story or a background that completely changed your perspective. That's the beauty of second chances. They allow us to dig deeper, to get past the surface, and to see what God sees in someone. It's not just about how we see others, it's also about how we see ourselves. Sometimes we let negative first impressions of ourselves linger, maybe from a failed relationship or a mistake at work or trying a new task or activity that we just weren't good at, or even hurtful words that somebody said a long time ago. Well, the good news is that there's second chances. God is in the business of second chances, and the ultimate second chance is a fresh start through His grace. The Bible's full of examples of people who defied first impressions and found redemption. Let's take Peter, for instance. When Jesus called Peter to be his disciple, Peter was a fisherman, hardly somebody we'd think of as a leader in the early church, but Jesus saw something more. Fast forward to the night of Jesus' arrest, and we see Peter deny him 3 times. That might have been the end of Peter's story in most people's eyes, a failed disciple who turned his back on his friend. But Jesus didn't give up on Peter. After his resurrection, Jesus offered Peter a second chance, asking 3 times, "Do you love me?" That moment restored Peter, and he went on to be one of the most important leaders in spreading the gospel. What does this teach us? First, that God sees potential in us even when we fail. And second, we're called to extend that same grace to others. Think about somebody in your life who might need a second chance. Might be the same person you thought of earlier, might be somebody completely new, might be somebody you've written off too quickly. Second chances are transformative. We've all been on both sides of that equation, either needing a second chance or being asked to give one. Maybe you messed up. Maybe you hurt a friend's feelings. Maybe you did something wrong at work. Maybe you didn't handle a situation well. When someone extends grace and gives you the chance to try again, it's a gift. Think about the world of sports. When athletes make mistakes, miss a shot, fumble a pass, or strike out, they don't just walk off the field forever. They get another chance to improve and contribute to the team. Coaches who see the potential beyond one bad play help athletes grow stronger and more resilient. And that same idea applies to us and our connections with others. If you've ever had a disagreement with a friend or a family member, you know how hard it is to mend things sometimes. But second chances allow people to show who they truly are beyond their mistakes. Think about this same application in the professional world. Many successful people have stories of failure before success. What about the entrepreneur who launched multiple businesses before finally finding that right idea? Or the author who faced rejection after rejection before finally getting that book published? What made the difference? Somebody was willing to believe in them again, or they were willing to believe in themselves. But here's something important, whether in sports or the professional world or our own lives. Second chances aren't just about others giving us grace. sometimes we need to extend that same kindness to ourselves. I heard it said one time that we can be our harshest critics. How many of us replay moments of failure in our minds over and over? What if instead we chose to say, well, that was a mistake, but it doesn't define me. I can grow from this and move forward. So, how do we live out the idea of first impressions and second chances in our daily lives? I mean, it sounds easy, right? Don't judge people the first time and everything will be good. Well, I think there's some practical ways we can put this idea into practice. First, I do think it's important when meeting somebody for the first time, we don't give an initial snap judgment on them. We pause and seek understanding. It's natural to form a quick opinion, but what if we slowed down and reminded ourselves that there's always more to somebody's story? Instead of relying on surface judgments, ask questions, listen, give the person time to reveal who they really are. We need to also let grace be our first response, even though it's probably a hard pill for us to swallow sometimes. Not every interaction will go smoothly. Maybe somebody is short with you or makes a mistake that affects you. Instead of reacting with frustration, choose to respond with grace. You never know what someone might be carrying. A kind word or a forgiving attitude can completely change the atmosphere of a situation. We can't forget to give second chances, even when it's hard. Relationships require forgiveness. Maybe a friend has let you down, or a colleague made an error that impacted your work. Giving a second chance doesn't mean ignoring consequences, but it does mean allowing room for redemption. Think about a time somebody gave you a second chance. How did you feel? How did it change your relationship with that person? Now imagine extending that same gift to somebody else. And don't forget to extend it to yourself and practice self compassion. Sometimes the hardest person to give a second chance to is ourselves. We replay mistakes in our minds, wishing we had done things differently. But God's mercies are new every morning, and that means we can start fresh too. When we commit to seeing others through the eyes of grace and give second chances, we're not only reflecting God's heart, but we experience a richer, deeper connection with those around us. So here's my challenge for you this week. Think about somebody you've misjudged, or someone with whom you've had a negative interaction or have a strained relationship. What would it look like to offer them a second chance? To see them through new eyes. Identify one place where you can give grace, not just to a person, but to a moment, a space, or a memory that deserves a second look. And remember, just as God never gives up on us, we can find beauty in the unexpected when we choose to open the door again. And if you're holding on to a negative view of yourself, ask God to help you let that go. Remember, His mercies are new every morning. Here's the thing. Second chances don't guarantee the outcome we want. Sometimes relationships won't be fully restored, and not every situation will turn out perfectly. But that's not the point. Second chances are about opening ourselves to the possibility of something better. Growth, healing, maybe even peace within our own hearts. When we approach life with grace, we become part of God's work in redeeming the broken places around us. Well, friends, as always, I would love to hear your stories. What happened when you gave someone or something a second chance? I'd love if you share your thoughts with me. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with somebody who you feel might need just a little bit of encouragement today. Until next time, go forward, leaving impressions of kindness, offering second chances freely, and living with a heart open to grace. In the next episode, we'll continue the Impressions series, talking about what God sees in us, how we perceive ourselves versus how He views us. We're going to talk about letting go of negative self-perception and embracing the way He sees each of us as individuals. That and more next time. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in this week. We'll see you back here next time, and we'll have more for you on cue.